A new poll shows that more Americans are concerned about climate change and feel the time to act is now. The CBS poll found that 64% of Americans think climate change is a serious problem. A majority of Americans think climate change needs to be addressed immediately. 18%, however, think it doesn't need to be addressed. So that continues to be a serious problem for us in the media to continue to think about. This week, NBC News, MSNBC, and Telemundo will focus on the climate emergency in a special series called Climate in Crisis. And this Thursday and Friday, MSNBC will be holding, a climate change forum with most of the presidential candidates. There are a few who haven't signed on, and we want to continue to invite them to join us. Today, we want to look at one government agency that does take climate change seriously, and that is the Department of Defense. The U.S. military is unique in its serious look at climate change because effects of planetary warming, sea level rise, and storm intensification all affect the military's mission and its ability to get that mission done. The Pentagon reports that since 2008, at least 17 troops have died of heat exposure during training exercises on U.S. bases. In 2018 alone, 2,792 cases of heat stroke or heat exhaustion were reported. That's up from more than 1,700 in 2008. That's a very big statistical increase. Now, those heat illnesses add up. The Pentagon estimates that it spent nearly $1 billion in the last decade treating the effects of heat exposure. And it's not just the troops being hit by warmer weathers. A Pentagon report warned that at Fort Greely in Fairbanks, Alaska, thawing permafrost decreases the structural ability to foundations, buildings, and transportation infrastructure. These are just some of the readiness costs. There are many. A 2007 report commissioned by the Pentagon warns about weakened and failing foreign governments, concluding the U.S. may be drawn more frequently into these situations to help to provide relief, rescue, and logistics or to stabilize conditions before conflicts arise. And with domestic disasters likely to increase, according to government data, military resources could be spread increasingly thin. Joining us now is John Conger, director of the Center for Climate and Security. He oversaw environmental policy at the Department of Defense. John, thank you for being with us.
Happy to be here.
How do people, there are lots of ways in which we can try to help people take the issue of climate change seriously. But when we look at it in the national security context, what would you tell people to think about?
Well, I think it's important to recognize that the military has recognized the threat from climate change for a very long time. And I think that in and of itself is a very compelling fact. When you have different voices talking about climate change and pro and con, but when the military says this affects my mission, it has a very important impact, and sometimes a more important impact than an environmentalist saying this is a big deal and you have to deal with it immediately. When military voices are up on Capitol Hill saying this is going to affect my bases, this is going to affect my training, my troops, this is going to affect where I'm going to have to fight in the future, that is a compelling message.
Specifically, why and how? For those at home who don't know, why is it that it's going to cost your troops so much more? What are the contributing factors?
So let's talk about a few different ways that climate change affects national security. On the very basic level, it affects your infrastructure. Sea level rise and flooding impacts infrastructure, and you can't fly planes off a flooded runway. It affects drought and wildfire in the Southwest. You can't use live fire munition during training when you have the potential for starting a wildfire. And so you hold back and you don't train as well as you might. You cited the figures on troops and the heat. Well, if they can't train during high heat days, that affects whether they can get their training done and whether readiness is going to be as high as it needs to be. But that's just one piece of it. There's another piece, which is it's going to have new missions that are created with the Arctic ice melting and Russians and Chinese moving to exert influence over that region. The U.S. military has a whole new mission. The U.S. Navy has a whole new ocean to patrol. So that's another whole different set of requirements that they're going to have to fulfill.
John, we have strangely turned immigration issues into national security issues these days. But if one is worried about people showing up on our shores or at our borders, migration is absolutely going to be an outcome of a warming planet.
Absolutely. And so when you have water scarcity, when you have food insecurity, when you have sea level rise that drives people from their previous homes, you've got large numbers of people that are going to be moving, and they've got to have some place to go. And I'll give you one example. In Syria, you had a situation before the current civil war where hundreds of thousands of Iraqi refugees had come into Syria and had settled in cities, unemployed largely, adding requirements to those cities. But then you had this record drought that displaced the entire Syrian agricultural industry. And all those farmers moved into the cities as well. And so you get the seeds of civil war getting created there by just the huge population that's being moved.
And Europe's politics were disrupted by 2.5 million refugees. Estimates from about climate change would say that we'd be 10 times that number or more around the world, the effects of drought and water scarcity. Hey, MSNBC fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down there and click on any of the videos here to watch the latest interviews and highlights. You can get more MSNBC for free every day with our newsletters. Just visit msnbc.com/newsletters to sign up now.